Welcome to Real, Brave, and Unstoppable, the podcast all about being real, finding courage, and creating a life you're excited to wake up to. I'm your host, Kortney Rivard, mindset expert, mom, adventurous spirit, and professional life coach. Thanks for tuning in and welcome to the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Real, Brave, and Unstoppable. Today, I have Darla Ledoux joining me on the show. Darla is a business coach, author, speaker, and like me, she's a recovering engineer. She's also one of my mentors. We'll talk more about her story once we get into the episode, but Darla founded the company Sourced, and I'm actually part of her Certified Source Leader program at the moment, which is another coaching certification that I am loving. It's so good. I just finished level 1 and I'm currently working on level 2, which is a certification tailored to leading retreats. I always say that you know a good certification program when you're doing the work that you'll be leading your clients through as you learn. And as you know, part of what I teach is how to be real, right? And so over the last 6 months in her program, I've identified some areas where I was really stuck in what Darla calls a default energy pattern, and she'll talk about that in the episode. And I wasn't really showing up in an authentic way, a way that is true to who I really am. So I wanted to have Darla on the show today to talk about shifting energy patterns and how doing that will allow you to be more of who you're meant to be. And when you can do that, it clears up so much in your life and is the foundation for so much joy and happiness. And not shifting those patterns will just keep you stuck being someone that you aren't. So super important stuff. Before we dive in, I want to briefly talk a little bit more about what Darla's company Sourced does. She and her team are committed to normalizing transformation on the planet, having more people understand their own transformational journey to reduce stress and increase ease on the whole. Sourced specializes in helping coaches, consultants, creatives, and healers to market, sell, and deliver deep transformation with their own magical gifts. I love what she does, and I'm excited for you to hear what she has to say too. So let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the show. I have Darla Ledoux with me on today's episode, and you've heard a little bit about her in the intro, but funny enough, Darla and I have actually known each other for a really long time. We went to college together. She was a chemical engineering major, and I was an aerospace engineering major, as you know. And I was also her big sister in the sorority we were in. So our paths diverged a little bit for a long time and then have kind of come back together. So Darla, welcome to the show. It's so awesome to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. And it's really fun to think about the college days and who you were for me. And I feel like souls that walk similar paths find each other again and again. And I've noticed this in my journey. So it's really excited to be here together.
Yeah. It's been a long time since we've actually sat down, not in like a group setting. So it's really nice to connect this way. So why don't we just jump in and tell us a little bit about like what you're up to now, who you are, what you do.
Yeah. So I am the founder of a company called Sourced. And we help coaches, consultants, creatives, and healers to deliver deep transformational work with their magical gifts. So we have a certification program, which helps people really be expert at facilitating transformation. And we'll talk about what that means today. And we also have a business division where we help people market and sell their work.
Yeah, excellent. I've had the amazing opportunity to work with Darla in both the business program, but also the certification program. And I always like to say that the best coaching programs are the ones where you actually do the work that you're asking your clients to do as you take them through it. And for me, just with your way of teaching transformation, I've had some of my own really huge shifts too. Tell us a little bit about, like you used the word, you're a recovering engineer. And I love that term, by the way.
I'm
But
sure you can relate to that.
I can totally relate to that. And I think the reason it resonates so much for me is I think, and you can tell me if this lands for you, but a lot of people like us took the engineering route, or like a similar, I always call them smart careers or smart jobs, because we learned at an early age that being smart got us a lot of attention and validation. And because of that, I know for me, I ended up in a place that wasn't really aligned with who I am. And so, like your story, if you wanted to share it, is another great example of being on that journey of finding what's true for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like it's important to just go back to this moment. So I was a chemical engineer, as Kortney said. I got a great job at Procter and Gamble. I felt really quite proud of myself because it was, a pretty competitive job to get. So instantly I felt very cool. Yeah, Kortney, you were at Boeing. I'm sure you had the same feeling.
Yep.
And they really make you feel that way,
Yeah,
and so
totally.
it really builds up your ego. But I was at that job and I had been receiving a performance review, and it was actually the review where I got promoted. And in the review, my boss told me all kinds of lovely things. And then he said, "Your soft skills are really great, Darla, but you might want to tone them down a bit because they'll only get you so far here." And I'm sure I made that scrunchy face, like, what? And he went on to basically explain that for me to get ahead and be in a leadership position sooner would mean I needed to take more of a technical route. In other words, the skills like understanding the customers that buy our products, being intuitive and compassionate, and able to communicate, and all of those things that I gravitated toward were just not going to get me there. And the reason that this was such a profound moment for me is I believed him. So even though I was loving my work, I got promoted. So clearly there was some affirmation around it. I was doing a lot of consumer research, understanding how our customers used our products and therefore how we could make products that would work better for them. And I was being rewarded, but I was also told, like, hey, you don't really fit.
Yeah. I feel like that was part of why that setting I didn't love that either. It's like the corporate workplace does not foster being authentic at all.
Right. Right.
So,
And, it's interesting to reflect, like, the more techie people who then would get promoted into leadership positions, and they weren't good people, right? It's like,
no.
it didn't really make a lot of sense in retrospect. But at the time, I kind of believed him, right? And so there's this part of me that's this growing belief in my intuitive ability, this sense of knowing that would really help me to bring insight into what our customers wanted to buy, right? Or even how to work with our manufacturers to help them understand what we needed. And that was growing, and that I really loved about myself. But then there was this voice that said, yeah, but just get in a lab. Right?
Yeah. Isn't that funny how even like you think about when we're growing up, that happens. And I know you talk about in your work too, how, as we're growing up, we have things shut off that, so we've had something violated and it's like, oh, don't go there anymore. And then we put on all these masks and layers, and pretty soon we just forget like what is true for us. And that sounds like another one of those situations where it's like you're kind of finding your way and finding who you are and how you want to be in the world. And then someone's telling you it's not okay. So I'm wondering after that, what happened after that? Like when they told you to tone down your soft skills, did you tone them down?
Probably did a little bit, but what actually happened, interestingly, so they said that, and then at the same time, I was nominated for a coach training program within my company. And it was so cool. They were doing this approach where you would coach people who were just starting to report to one another and help them get their biases about each other out on the table up front. So it was like we would sit down and have these meetings and basically say, what do you judge this other person about? What do you judge this person about? There was a more formal approach than that. But in order to do that work, I had to look at my own judgments about myself and other people. And that was my first foray into the work of coaching and this awareness that our beliefs are actually influencing how we show up and interact with the world. So even though they said tone down your soft skills, they sent me to get more soft skills.
I was just, as you said that, I was like, isn't that what your
Right.
your next step was?
It was probably a step toward leaving, right, by saying yes to that opportunity. But yeah, it was amazing because it totally changed my life. Being in that training and really understanding that my own experience in life has created beliefs that are making me judge everything around me and limiting my possibilities in life. That blew my mind. And it was like, it was like I had just discovered water, right? Like a fish discovering water or something. I was looking around the room like, why is everybody not talking about this?
Yeah. What I really love about this work is that until you have that awareness that you don't have to believe those things, they're just in your mind. They're not right. They don't have to be right. And you get to decide that. That's part of what I love about this work is it just, when you learn that and that clicks, it just opens up so much possibility.
Totally. Yeah. And from that point, it was like, I couldn't stop thinking about that. I started obsessively reading self-help books. And, I think I really quickly became aware I was in the wrong career because I was no longer willing to tolerate, you said earlier, Kortney, the inauthenticity, right? Which people weren't trying to go around being authentic. It just was the cultural norm, right? We would have the meeting before the meeting so that in the meeting, no one said anything that was off track from the pre-decided outcome of the meeting. And so, all of that stuff, it just never really made a lot of sense to me. It made it really hard to stay when I was obsessed with this idea that we could actually tell our truth and it would free us.
That's an amazing way of putting it. And that's really like getting back to the authenticity piece of it, which really is truth. That's what, in my experience, like my listeners know my story, but that's really where I found the way that for everything to be okay. Like things in my life were for a while not okay. And when I finally got to the place of this is my journey is to find that truth, it just really changed my life so much. So what I love about what you're talking about is you were in a place where, it was not aligned for you. And then you had this promotion into this coaching in corporate, but you've taken so much of that, of what you've learned in that into what you do now. And I think like, just to tell my listeners, one of the things that I have learned from Darla's work is the number one thing I would say in the last 6 months of working with her is just trusting, listening to intuition, not making things hard. So I've really learned, and not just in my work, but just in my life too, to listen, to get out of my head, tune into my intuition and just let it come to me. And Darla, can you speak a little bit more to just how you use, like we were talking about energy and shifting energy patterns. Can you talk a little bit about how you use energy in your work to facilitate transformation?
Yeah. Yeah. So let's start with just a foundation of what is energy. So energy is on a scientific level, like we both took quantum mechanics, right? So on a scientific level, it's the vibration of our cells. On a practical level, it really is the thoughts we think that impact the vibration of our cells. So when we are, let's say I teach this thing with 7 levels of energy. So level 1 is a victim energy. In victim energy, we have the thoughts or the expectations that life is going to happen to us and there's nothing we can do about it. So we're kind of in this place of waiting to see if the circumstances are going to line up or not. So when we're in that energy of waiting to see if the circumstances are going to line up, then we're in reaction to what's happening. And so the vibration that we're putting out isn't making any kind of request of the universe, of other people to show up for us in a way that we would prefer, right? We're just literally letting life happen and then we're responding to it.
Yeah.
And so you can feel almost like a pulling back of the energy. I'm like pulling back from my microphone, shouldn't do that. But there's a pulling back of the energy when we're in that victim, right? We're like surviving, we're in defense. There's another level of energy where we are in what, if shorthand is the win-win. So there's a win-win energy where I'm going in, playing with life, thinking, okay, how do I show up in a way that I win and it helps other people win too? And so we can even feel in my voice, I can feel in my body as I talk about that, my posture shifts, my expectations of life shift. And so how I show up and interact, like literally the vibration of my cells is different when I'm interacting with life from a perspective of win-win. There's, there's 7 different levels of energy. There's 7 different ways I could interact with the world. I have shorthanded it to call it default energy or sourced energy. And so I'll talk a little bit about what that means. I talked some about it earlier. So default energy is when we are in a place where our thoughts and our vibration are lined up with a survival pattern, right? Some way that we decided, usually before the age of 7, before our conscious mind is formed, we make a series of decisions of how to show up in life to survive. So we're not actually like trying to win. Generally, we're thinking, how do I survive? And so as an example, you and I both have the let me be smart. I don't mind specifically, if I'm smart, I get love. That was a decision that was programmed early on in life that then colored all of my choices to the point where after I had that training in corporate and I knew I loved this work of coaching, I was still afraid to do it because it didn't seem like a smart career.
I can totally relate to that.
Yeah, it took me almost 10 years from the time I learned about it till I left and started my coaching business, because I had this thought, that's not smart. I'm a chemical engineer. Being a life coach is not going to look good.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that was what was going on. And so, because I wouldn't judge anyone else for that.
Right.
But I was trapped. I was trapped in a default energy pattern that says I have to be smart to get love. Therefore, if something doesn't look smart, right, I'm a victim to that.
Yeah. Easy to see why we get stuck in those patterns then too.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a couple ways that default shows up. It shows up as victim energy or conflict energy. And it sometimes shows up as this energy of acceptance or reconciliation, where we're like, oh, we start explaining away why other people just can't possibly show up for us. So we just have to do everything ourselves. That's a common default pattern as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It sounds like what's coming up for me when you mention acceptance and reconciliation, those are tricky. It feels like those can easily disguise themselves as a higher level. Just acceptance seems like something that people kind of strive for. What do you think about that? Like, is that something?
Yeah, well, it is a higher. That's really, really
okay.
Astute, because so level 1 is victim. That's, life is happening to you. We talked about that. Level 2 is conflict, which is this, like, really the way I like to describe it is this sense that there's only so much to go around. So I have to get mine, right? And so I have to fight for what's mine. I have to fight to get ahead.
Good old scarcity mindset.
Yeah, scarcity. Exactly. And here's the thing, Kortney, we are programmed with this. Like the society on the whole, the average is 2.4. which is conflict energy. And I mean, look, turn on the news and it makes total sense. So
Yeah.
our society is in conflict energy because of a belief that resources are scarce and that we need to hoard as much as possible to survive in life.
Yeah.
So that's level 2, right? So we can feel that. And so level 3 is this acceptance, reconciliation. And so it is a higher energy. And by the way, none of these are good or bad, right? We get things done from conflict, really, but it's just not as fulfilling.
Right.
So
Right.
at level 3, what's great is we start to say, well, I'm not going to sit here and be upset because of this conflict. I'm going to, rise above the conflict, and I'm just going to handle things myself.
Yeah.
And that's not wrong. It's just that it can tend to be you in a vacuum doing everything yourself.
Yeah. What occurs to me is it sounds like with really everything, there's like we talk about shadow work and coaching a lot, but like the good side and the shadow side, I won't call it the bad side, but it sounds like each one of these levels probably has a little bit of that. And I feel like what I'm hearing from you is that, like, let's take acceptance as an example, is that it's great to accept things, but if it becomes a pattern that doesn't serve you, that's where it starts to be not a great place to be.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And so again, this is why I like to think about default and sourced, because if it's a default, it's coming from a survival pattern. Like the idea of acceptance could be a sourced energy if it's coming from a place of, wow, I feel really alive and inspired by the idea of fully accepting right where I am. If previously my default was conflict, if previously I was judging myself for everything.
Yeah. And with these different levels of energy, we move through them, right? Like nobody gets to one and stays there, right? We kind of have little bits of all of them in us.
We all have access to all of them. Yeah. And so, but we have, if we think about like a river flowing, right? And if there were 7 different, ways we could flow, we have paths that are more entrenched.
Yeah.
That we've worn that path more often.
Sure. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense, which is a lot of the work of coaching, is having someone to help you unentrench some of those patterns and create new ones, right?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they are either things we decided, again, before we had a conscious mind, right? So before the age of 7, every decision we make feels like it's the truth.
Right.
Because we don't have this conscious mind. When the conscious mind develops, the conscious mind is the part of us that can consider an idea and decide, does it feel true or not? So we can create this awareness of our choices and how we're behaving and kind of make a new choice if it doesn't feel good. But when we're young, we don't have that fully developed, and things just go in. And then they become in these entrenched energy patterns that we don't even know are there, because it's like there's not any other way. It's just the water we swim in.
Yeah.
And so the work of coaching can help people become aware that there's even a trench there, let alone that there's the choice to change it, and then hold the container to actually make that change.
Yes, that's a really great point. I know some of you listening may be wondering, like, what some examples of these patterns can be. And I know for myself, well, we've already talked about this idea of having a career, a job that's quote unquote smart. But like for my own self, perfectionism was a default. Well, it still can be, right? But a pattern for me for a long time that I always was really kind of proud of. And any perfectionist listening can probably relate to this, but it was a pattern that tended to get me validation, approval. And so I learned that things had to be perfect for them to be good. And of course, that's a no-win situation because nothing can ever be perfect. So that just left me in this never-ending cycle of, trying to feel okay with myself. But when I was little, there was something that created that pattern that I didn't have any choice to say, yeah, I don't like that, or I do like that. So by the time I had the choice, it was already so entrenched.
Yeah. And then you feel like you're going to die if you kind of color outside those lines.
Yes.
Because you literally have no conscious memory of ever doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. Another example that's coming to my mind is I don't tend to be someone who will like argue a point or really, I've gotten better about this, but like raise my hand to like share. And I remember when I was in like first grade or something, raising my hand and getting an answer wrong and somebody laughing at me. And so that affected me for a really long time. Just that moment said, if you get it wrong, you're going to get laughed at, or, so there's another example of
that's something. Exactly how this works.
Yeah. And then and then our brain wants to keep finding evidence for that. It doesn't look for the other side of it. It's like, once we have that belief, our brain just tries to accumulate evidence for that belief. So you can see why it gets so entrenched. One
that's coming up for me, as you were talking about the perfectionism, and that just is the way it is. One that I worked with in recent years was flexibility. So this idea that a word or a concept can be default or sourced, depending on how you're holding it, right? Depending on your motivation behind it. For a long time, I held flexibility like a badge of honor. Like you said about perfection, right? It was like, I was the best person to go on vacation with because I can roll with anything. And then I would judge people who couldn't.
Yeah.
Like, get over it. Right? Like, how limiting is that to be so rigid? And then I came to discover that actually I have preferences also. And that we're going to talk about sourced energy. When we are in a place that's truly authentic to us, I think the word you would use, Kortney, is authentic.
Yeah.
That's where our sourced energy comes from. And when I'm really tuned in to my authenticity, I'm actually not that flexible. I can be flexible. I have access to flexibility. It's a well-worn path. But the truth is, when I was young, I didn't have any choices. My parents were divorced when I was young, and there was this constant finding something to do with me. When my mom was a single mom, and, they shared custody occasionally. And so there was a lot of this back and forth, and there wasn't a place for me to really have preferences and all of that. And so that was really painful. And so rather than be present with that pain, instead, I decided to claim flexibility. Sure. And I didn't even know I had done it. Right.
Yeah.
And so the process for me of transforming that came back to really being able to tune into my inner knowing, which I believe comes from source, which we can call the universe, the divine, God, collective consciousness, energy, however we think about it, but we each have a unique expression of this. And so for me to reclaim that I actually have preferences, and that there are things that work better for me than others, and that it's okay actually not to be flexible all the time, was a huge transformation for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Would you say that when you were being the flexible person, and that was like your badge of honor, would you say that it was like, I don't know, almost a form of like people pleasing, and that you didn't want the conflict so you were flexible? Or,
I mean, I don't even know if it would be that conscious, right? It was really just, I don't have preference. I was so out of touch with my preferences. And so I guess we could say, as a kid, maybe there was an awareness that if I had a preference, it would cause a conflict.
Oh, sure.
Right. Yeah. But it was so far buried by that point, I wasn't even aware of it.
Right. Yeah. It's crazy how that stuff, it builds. So, well, let's talk about sourced energy. We've talked about the default.
Yeah. So here's what I want to say about the default as we shift into source is inherent in any default pattern, there is energy there. And so we don't want to be afraid of it. We don't want to shame it or make it wrong because it's still energy.
Yeah.
And so transformation is the shifting of that default energy into sourced energy. So, as an example of my flexibility, being able to say, whoa, that's been really powerful in my life. And what if I could take that same energy and put it toward defining my own preferences?
Yeah.
Right. So we don't want to say, oh, default bad, sourced good, because it's actually the transformation of it that's so powerful.
Right.
Which I know, you help people with if they're in a place of judging themselves for something and they can actually learn to love that part of themselves. There's a new energy there that they can turn into something else.
Absolutely.
So sourced energy is it's a higher vibration generally. And the way that I think about it is it's words that describe a way of being that really aligns with our soul.
Yeah. How else would you explain, or any other things that you could explain to my audience that would help them identify with that?
Yeah. So I can share kind of the higher levels of energy, right? We shared level 1, 2, and 3. I can share the higher ones so people can kind of get a feeling of it, but it really is very, very personal. So one person's default is another person's sourced, right? There was a time where the energy of being selfish was a huge breakthrough for me, which you can get, right, as a contrast to that flexibility.
Yeah.
So the energy of selfish for me felt so alive and so good, right? Whereas to someone else, it might be like, ooh, yeah, that's a default. I've been selfish my whole life and now I want to be generous. So I want to share that first. If we look at the higher levels of energy in general, there's 4. There is what I call Sally service. So there's this energy of concern and compassion, giving to others, really focusing on helping others win. And that takes the attention off of you and life is not so personal. So we can feel that starts to be so much better than this idea of resources are scarce and I have to fight for them. Right? It's a very generous energy. It's a giving and service oriented energy. The next level up is that win-win that we talked about. This is the energy of collaboration, of coming together and saying, hey, this is what I really want. What do you really want? Okay, how can we work together that we both get what we want? That energy is very creative, right? A lot of innovation happens when 2 different parties come together and say, well, I would like to create this. I would like to create this, right? And that's where we get really innovative. And so that energy, again, it's about more of the collaborative or the collective whole.
Okay.
Level 6 energy is the intuitive energy. So when it comes to winning and losing, this is where we say we're all always winning. So at this place, we're so unattached, Kortney, that it's like, if you win, I'm thrilled. I'm just as happy as if I win because it's all uplifting the collective.
Yeah.
A lot of transformation happens at this level. This is my favorite level because when we see something, quote, wrong in the world, when we're coming from this perspective, okay, and we see something that maybe people think is wrong in the world, we immediately say, how can I shift that? Because if I can shift that within me, it shifts collectively.
Yeah, I can see that.
And so we can really see that that's such a different space to come from versus the level 3 where it's like, oh, so-and-so is not getting their job done. Let me just do it for them.
Yeah.
Right. There's some similarities in that sense of personal responsibility and ownership. At the level 6, there's no separation between you and I. A way that it's pretty a profound concept. The way that someone, who's maybe working in a regular job and not talking about energy regularly and not in this conversation regularly could think about it is, we're all sharing the same planet.
Yeah.
And so rather than, focused on how am I going to survive, we're instead thinking, okay, we're sharing this planet together. So whatever I bring to this planet, others get to enjoy, and vice versa.
Yeah, that's a really good way of describing it. One thing that, as you're talking, I can, in my own experience, when you talked about the victim energy and then the conflict energy earlier, I think it's also for people listening, I work with a lot of clients that are in that place of feeling like life is happening to them or things are scarce. And, it's a lot of a struggle. They worry about how they're going to get out of that. And I think what's really interesting is that, like, as you were talking about level 6, I could feel in my body, I could feel a different, it just felt lighter. And it's interesting because when I was back in that place of feeling just the lower energy levels, everything that came into my mind was really negative. And now, like you said, in this different energy, it's like, there's awareness that you can shift it. It's almost like there's more possibility that opens up in those higher levels. Would you say that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, let's talk about shifting patterns. And by the way, the highest level, level 7, is the idea that winning and losing are illusions, because we're really just here experiencing and there's nowhere to get. Right? Okay. So that's a very, very Zen kind of place to come from. I share that. And just to kind of complete, I wasn't planning on sharing the 7 levels, but since we went there, I wanted it to be complete. Yeah. And that idea of, if winning and losing were illusions, that can be a great energy shifter. If you're in acute stress, for you to ask yourself, if winning and losing were illusions right now, how would I be in this moment? That is a quick shift kind of tip that can help really take you out of a lower energy, because all lower energies are concern about survival, right? It's all about concern about winning or losing.
Oh, I love that question. That's a juicy one.
Yeah.
That's what I love to ask people questions. And I know you teach this too in your work, but just asking people questions or, encouraging people to think about what would be available to you if, X, Y, or Z. And that's a really great question.
Exactly. And I don't walk around living like winning and losing are an illusion. Okay. Yeah. I visit there often. It's pretty regular, in terms of the well-worn paths, right? It's a pretty well-worn path for me at this point, but I'm not walking around thinking that all the time, because I'm a human and we're on this planet as humans to experience all the energy levels, really. Yeah. And so if we were in that place, we wouldn't really experience being human, right? It's a very spiritual energy and we wouldn't be in the world so much. Yeah. So, but it's a great quick shift question. But what I want people to know, Kortney, and you help people with this so beautifully. And so, if anyone is here thinking, I would like new entrenched patterns of thinking at a higher energy level, you can hire Kortney and she can help you with this as well. I personally train coaches, consultants, creatives, healers, facilitators of transformation. So that's where I focus, people like Kortney. What I want you to know is you can shift these patterns to where you don't walk down them again in the future. And that's transformation. Transformation is when we create a new awareness that permanently shifts the way we show up and interact with life. So this is possible, right? This isn't about baby stepping our way. Not that there's a rush. There's no rush. It takes time to integrate new energies, and we can make the shift in a moment.
Yeah. That's the amazing thing about it, is that just because you might have to take baby steps doesn't mean it doesn't happen linearly. You could take baby steps, but then it can click. And in a moment you just, it's there. And I've had that experience. It's very amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. Do you want me to share an example of that, Kortney?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I know you talk a lot about body image.
Yeah.
And, being comfortable in your skin. Yeah. And so I thought I would share this example. when I was a kid, and like I said, my parents were divorced, I experienced a lot of things that kids shouldn't experience growing up. And I started gaining weight. And so I was pretty chubby. I weighed 140 pounds when I was in like the third grade or something like that. And so I had this feeling of being fat and something's wrong with me. And it like ruled my life. And when I was in seventh grade, I lost weight. Like I went through puberty, I lost weight and I looked, quote, normal. I know you'll understand this,
Yeah.
but in my mind, I was the fat kid. Right.
Mm.
And that was a very entrenched way of thinking. And so even though I look back on pictures and I looked perfectly great, I didn't feel that way.
Yeah.
And so this awareness of my body and my eating was so present for me because my mom, as a result of whatever her stuff was about weight, was constantly putting me on diets and saying things like, do you think you should eat that, when I was a kid? And so that was constantly running in my mind. Right. And so I went on a retreat. I know you and I both love retreats.
Yes.
Can't wait to have more of them. But I went on a retreat and it was a transformational retreat. And we did this exercise where we looked at an area of our life that really wasn't working for us in order to transform it. And so I picked the area of my body and food. And so as I started to, do the exercise and journal, I came to this point. So these patterns, we make a decision in a moment in time to file something away as a truth. I call it the small T truth, but it's based on a lie. So when I was looking at my journaling, so the first thing is we have to be actually committed to transforming something in order for it to transform. So, I would say 50% of the coaching is helping someone get to actually being committed to transforming it.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
Right. So I was doing this exercise and realizing how much of my life force energy I was spending pre-planning what I was going to eat, beating myself up for what I ate, like deciding if today was going to be a good food day or a bad food day, either cutting up vegetables or going to get chocolate or whatever it would be, right? It was consuming so much energy. And so I became aware of that in this retreat to where I said, you know what, I'm committed to letting this go. And I came back in time to a moment when I was a kid and my mom worked at a bank. She was a bank teller and she would send me to different people's houses for babysitting. We lived with my grandma and there were, all my grandma's friends on the street. So one day she sent me next door to Mrs. Wilberg's house. And I loved going to Mrs. Wilberg's house because she was super nice and she gave me candy. And so she sent me next door to Mrs. Wilberg's house and she pinned a note to my shirt that said, "Please don't feed me."
Oh.
And she sent me out the door.
Oh.
So here I am on retreat and this memory comes up and it's a memory that I was very aware of, but I didn't know there was anything I could do about it. So this memory came up and we did an exercise to work with the memory to really start to see it as a lie instead of the truth. So whatever I had made up about what that meant about me, right? Like think I'm a zoo animal, right? Like that was kind of the vibe.
Yeah.
I was able to release that energy pattern in that exercise.
That's amazing. I could totally relate.
And I feel myself reliving like the letting go of that.
Yeah.
And here's what happened in my life afterward is I literally stopped thinking about food. Now I had all kinds of new problems that I didn't know I could have, which was I would go to work without a lunch. I would get to, 4 p.m. and realize I hadn't eaten all day. And it was like, that would have never happened before. So these were good problems in my opinion.
Yeah. Did you have a question about that? Did you have any like time in between that you had to work on it? Or was it that exercise, that retreat that helped?
It was gone.
Wow.
It was gone.
That's how
And that,
powerful transformation can be.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. And that's available, right? But I had to get to the source of it. And I had to really get to the place where I wasn't bringing any default energy to that conversation.
Yeah.
And all that was, Kortney, exactly what you talk about, was full acceptance of all of it.
Yeah. Well, also like, yeah, all of it. That's the thing I think I want
And
to impress upon people too, is that none of it's bad. It's just all is there. And the more you can just allow it all to be there, the less power it has over you.
yeah, and I want to add full acceptance of all of it. And the exercise was a partner exercise.
Okay.
And so it was also being witnessed.
Mm,
So it wasn't just my full acceptance, but this other person's full acceptance. And
yeah.
as you know, I talk about that in my work in training people. We call it validation.
Mm-hmm.
And you alluded to this quote at the very beginning of this. One of my favorite quotes is, as a human being, we cannot accept a part of ourselves that we haven't shared with another human being and had validated rather than violated.
Yeah. I love that quote. You don't really think about that until, like, I didn't really think about that until you shared that quote with our group. And it's so true. The difference of just acknowledging something to yourself versus having someone else sit in that with you is night and day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because if someone else shamed us for it, then we really do believe it's shameful. And so
Yeah.
until we can pull it back out and look at it, and yes, it's great if you can tell yourself, hey, that's not shameful, you're okay, right? But someone else created the belief, so we need another human to help us release it. We really, really do.
Yeah.
And I wish that weren't the case because that would be a lot simpler, right? But actually, what it's so beautiful to be able to do this vulnerable work of healing with another human being. Like, we're not on this planet with other human beings to do life alone.
I think when you're, like you said, when you're committed to doing it, which is obviously, you talked about the first step, you learn so much about yourself and that you have so much more power than you ever thought you did. And so much more possibility than you ever can imagine.
Yeah.
Locked
Think
away.
about just, so if we think energy, letting go of that concern about food freed up so much energy, so much time
Yeah.
for other things.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. That's something that for me too has been a struggle of when you talked about like planning out, obsessing about your food and good food day, bad food day, like that, all of that relates so much. But yeah, it does. It takes up a lot of energy. And when you release that to be able to put into something that serves you better, it's amazing.
Yeah. And we need to be willing to look at it, and we need to be willing to go deep enough to pull it out at the root.
Deep enough. Yeah. Yep. And it's interesting too, because that's work too. That's hard on your own, because there's a lot of things I think that are there, and we might even be kind of aware that they're there, but there's like a subconscious thing almost that doesn't let us go past a certain point.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like that, I feel that I've felt
Yeah.
that before.
Yeah. Because those patterns we create before the age of 7, they're very loyal to us.
Yes.
They think that we will die if we don't do this, if we aren't perfect, if we aren't flexible, people won't like us, they'll abandon us, we will die.
Right. And I think, like you also teach too, that that pattern, it's easy to keep it because there's some benefit that it's giving us, that we think it's a benefit until we really start digging into the other side of that, what it's costing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
How would you recommend people, if they're kind of wanting to play around with this and look at like how do they shift something, or how do they, are there any practices that you could recommend for people to play around with?
Well, the first thing I recommend is my book, Shift the Field.
Great book.
And, it's written for coaches, consultants, creatives, and healers. So it's written from the standpoint of writing to someone who's facilitating transformation. But any human can understand their own transformation by reading that. So I would really recommend that. For me, I'm not into quick fix exercises.
Yeah.
Because I really, I think I was just writing about this. Our society is so hooked on the quick fix. The media wants you to be able to give 3 sound bites that someone can remember in 5 seconds. And it's like, it doesn't really work that way. And that's why so many people are busy churning in the, well, I wrote my affirmation, or I, did this. I burned the thing I wanted to let go of, and it didn't go anywhere. And it's not a quick fix exercise, actually.
Yeah.
And it's also not to be done alone. So, my second piece of advice would be hire a coach.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hire someone who's trained to facilitate transformation, who can help witness and validate the small t truth that you've been believing that's really been a lie. But it's scary as hell to admit that, and to admit that there could be another way. Like, we don't want to walk in there alone.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are a lot of those small T truths that are really scary to let go of. One that comes up for me is related to perfectionism, kind of, is also competition. Like, my just authentic self does not want to be competitive. I want to just be, but when I get around other people who are competitive, it's really hard for me to let go of that, because I'm afraid that I'll look bad or I won't measure up. Mm-hmm. So it can be really scary to let go of those things. And really, they're stubborn. They want to stay.
Yeah. And then say choosing to let go of that, right? Say you show up in a situation like that, but you come from a different energy and you behave differently.
Yeah.
Being able to report that back to your coach and celebrate it, because you're probably not going to celebrate it with those competitive people.
Totally.
Right?
Totally. Yes.
So having that space to really own that, that felt really good in my system. I could see them all being in this conversation, and I really didn't need to be.
Yeah.
For example,
that's so important too. You bring up the idea of celebrating in our calls. Like, you do that with our group all the time. Celebrations are first. And I do that with my clients too. Like, make lists of celebrations, keep lists of things that, or even the little tiny things, everything's, anything can be a celebration. But that's a really good point too, is this work is hard work, and we don't think to reward ourselves for just those little wins, but it's so important.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you want to say about just default sourced energy, shifting patterns, so that you can really show up in the world as like the person you're meant to be, before we talk about your cool event?
When you are showing up sourced, it is super inspiring to other people, and you're going to think it's not. Yeah. And that's what's interesting. So Kortney, in your example of perfectionist, letting go of perfection. I listened to some of your podcasts. I know you're super real. You're sharing right where you are. That, is the opposite of perfection, mm-hmm. right? It's like, that's what you stand for. And we think it's going to cause problems, but it's actually really inspiring. For me, I remember the first time I publicly paused, I put my hand on my heart and on my belly, which is what I tend to do to remind myself to feel what's really true for me. And I closed my eyes and I took a breath. I was in public in front of a room. And then I made a decision about what I was going to teach next, right? I was doing a talk, and someone asked me about it later. And I was kind of unaware, Kortney, that it was such an odd thing to do in public, because I'd been doing it so much, right? So when you are really sourced, your authentic self, it's going to look weird in public sometimes. And the person that asked me about it was so excited and so inspired, and was like, I could see how that would totally work for me if I were willing to do that.
Yeah. That's one of the things that I'm really passionate about is, well, I think Brene Brown talks about, vulnerability begets vulnerability. And I've witnessed for myself that when I show up with other people and I don't have all the need to look perfect, or, I can just be who I am and just be fine being a normal person. It's like, you're right. You don't really realize the impact it has on other people. I've noticed that the best relationships, the best connections that I have ever made are when I'm in that place, because they're real. And other people, it's like, it gives them permission to do the same thing. And it's just like, if we could all just embrace that, that's one of the things I think about, like, what would our world be like if we could all just embrace that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Be
that's
amazing.
beautiful. Yes. Beautiful. So, Darla, you have an event coming up in February. So, Darla, why don't you tell everyone about Shift the Field Live and just what it's about and who it's for?
Yeah. So Shift the Field is the name of my book. And as we launched it and started putting it out into the world, I really wanted to create a space because, by the way, in my what I call my 10 years in the self-help aisle, I read countless books, and reading them is one thing and integrating them is another. And so I wanted to create a space for people to integrate what they learned in the book with exercises and practices and connecting with other leaders like them. And so it's called Shift the Field Live, and it's happening February 17th to 19th. It's on Zoom. We make it very experiential, even though it's on Zoom. So it's not like sit and listen for 3 days. And it is specifically designed for people who want to facilitate transformation. That being said, if you want to create your own transformation, you're still welcome to come, because you will have your own transformation. And the activities and exercises are designed for other people who are doing this work, working in some kind of service. We even had graphic designers come last year who weren't doing transformation at all, but realized that that was their calling. And so, if you're here, you might be in a job, but if you're feeling resonant with this idea of coaching and transformation and helping other people become more free in life, then it would be for you. On the first day, we talk about the anatomy of a transformation, meaning how a transformation actually works. There's 3 stages and there's some sub points within the stages. And so you'll really learn how transformation works. On the second day, we're talking about vibration and the vibration that you bring to your life and your business in just how you're showing up and how you're speaking and the stories you tell. And then on the third day, we're talking about how to cultivate commitment. And we're actually spending a whole day on that, because once the commitment to transformation happens, the transformation is inevitable. So we're spending a whole day on that on the third day.
Amazing. I'll go ahead and put the link for that in the show notes for anyone who is interested in learning more or signing up. And if what Darla is talking about resonates at all with you, I highly, highly recommend it. If you could just tell everybody where to find you, other than I'll put all these in the show notes too, but just tell everyone where they can find you if they want to learn more or follow you on social media and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm Darla Ledoux on Instagram. We are Sourced on Facebook, and sourcedexperience.com is the website. Up at the top of the website, we do have a really fun quiz that shows you how your intuition works. So if you're not facilitating transformation, if the event doesn't feel like it's for you, that quiz would be a really good place to start.
Yeah, the quiz is great. It's very insightful. So definitely go check that out. And if you are an entrepreneur and you're looking for someone to teach you the way of facilitating transformation for people, I definitely can't recommend Darla enough. And if you're not an entrepreneur and you're just looking to, shift some of your own energy patterns, I invite you to hop on over to my website at KortneyRivard.com. Let's talk, and we can schedule a call to chat about what's coming up for you in your life and what kind of transformations you want to make, what kind of shifts you want to make your life amazing.
Yes, do that.
So, well, Darla, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show. This was such great information. I'm excited to be putting it in the hands of more and more people. So thank you again.
You.
Yeah. Well, everyone, if you have any questions about anything, also feel free to hit me up on email and please go leave a rating and a review. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Well, friends, thanks for hanging out with me today on Real, Brave, and Unstoppable. If you love this podcast and want more, you have to check out my Real, Brave, and Unstoppable Facebook community, where I share more tips, training, and free coaching opportunities. Learn more over at KortneyRivard.com/group. And don't forget to review, subscribe, and share this podcast with a friend.